we're following best architectural practices. All okay. Our partner, I mean, our operator messed up, so I'm going to do the intro again. It was really good. So if the second round is not as awesome, just know that the first one was great. So hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Howdy Partner. Um, Today joining me is my co-host Claudine, if you have already met her before and been on the show. And today we're joined by our partner Postman. We're joined by Kin and Mark. So we'll start with a round of introductions. If you have not met me before, I'm Hahnara. I'm a partner solutions architect here at AWS, and I help our partners follow best architectural patterns. I'm going to pass it off to you, Claudine, down here.
Yeah, Claudine Morales. I'm also a partner solutions architect here and super excited to be here with Postman and Hahnara. I've been here a couple of times before, but this is my first time co-hosting with Hahnara, and we're going to have a lot of fun with Postman today. So, Mark and
Dive in,
Kin.
Mark. Go ahead, Mark. Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
No.
Oh no, we'll have to throw it to
We
Kin,
lost Mark.
operator.
Well,
Oh, can you hear me?
huh. I heard you a little bit there, Mark. Oh.
No,
Oh,
I
no.
think you might have the wrong input into. Might need to update.
All
Okay,
right. Well,
go on,
let's
Kin.
dive in. I'll just plow forward. So Mark is my he leads up partners at Postman, and he's my partner in crime when it comes to doing things like this with our partners and kind of telling the shared story. My role, I'm the chief evangelist at Postman. So what I do is I talk to our customers, kind of talk to them about their API lifecycle. I work with our partners as we're doing here. And I also run Postman Open Technologies, which is all about API first, open API specifications, and other open technologies that people use as part of their life cycle. Thanks for having me.
Skin. Maybe this works now.
Oh,
We
there
can
you
hear
are.
you.
There
Got
we go.
you.
All right. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, we'll be talking about APIs today with Postman, which is extremely fitting. So before we kick it off to Kin and his really awesome demo he has prepared, Claudine's going to start us off with a demo and a brief intro on APIs, what APIs are, utilizing API Gateway on AWS.
Yeah.
So
Would love to talk about all of that, but maybe Hahnara, we should start off by telling them what Howdy Partner is. Why are we here? What do we do at Howdy Partner?
Right. So if you haven't joined us today at Howdy Partner and this is your first time, this is our AWS Twitch channel where we talk about partner solutions with our partners. It can be geared to anyone who is interested in technology and you want to learn. We have some experts who can talk through that, so feel free to interact with us on the chat, ask us any questions, and we're happy to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Hahnara. Yeah, so I'm going to provide a really high-level overview of what APIs are, and then I prepared a super tiny demo for you guys just to show you how APIs work. I built a small serverless app to show you how API can be used with Lambda and DynamoDB. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but what is an API? Application programming interface. So I really think about an API as a system that facilitates communication between two different applications. I like to think about it as me going to a restaurant. I'm application A, and the kitchen is application B. And, at least in every restaurant I've been to in my life, I can't just go in the kitchen and request the chef to make me food, right? Like, someone has to actually take my order, and that person is most likely the person who's waiting on my table. The waiter or the waitress acts like an API between me and the kitchen. They kind of mediate that interaction. So I put my order in with the wait staff. My order is really the API request. So they take my order and in one way or another tells the kitchen, this is what Claudine ordered. So typically they would have a standardized way of communicating customer orders to the kitchen. If the item I ordered is available, the kitchen makes me food. And when the food is done, the wait staff brings it back to my table. So that's like the API response. If the item is not available, what typically happens is the wait staff probably tells me that the item is it's not available, and that's also an API response. When you use an app on your mobile phone, for example, let's see, what app do I use a lot? Zillow. It's an app that lets you see homes for sale or homes for rent, because I love to look at homes and I like to keep tabs on the housing market in Seattle. So every time I interact with the Zillow app, like for example, if I enter a city and state or zip code in the search field and then I press enter, that's essentially me sending a request to an API that tells a server on the Zillow end that I just requested to see homes in a particular location. So the outcome then is I am presented with a list or maybe a map of homes in my search area. That's the response. The Zillow app also provides a service that lets me search for a realtor that I could contact if I needed one. There's even a service for shopping for mortgage rates. So every time I interact with these features on the app, I'm essentially making API requests to some server at Zillow, and the data that I get back is a response. So what makes APIs important? Today, in the modern world, there are really a ton of APIs that are published so that others can consume them. So for developers, this is so great because they probably don't have to reinvent the wheel. So let's go back to the Zillow example. Zillow's API is actually public. So if you're a developer and you want to create an app that has real estate content, you can leverage their API to expose their data from your site. So imagine having to collect and store all of that data and create all of that content from scratch. That's probably a huge amount of work, right? That's being abstracted away by your ability to leverage Zillow's API. And this is also important to mention from a security standpoint. Imagine going to Zillow and asking them if your app could connect directly to their databases so you could get their data into your site. Like I don't think anyone would be thrilled if somebody requested something like that. But there's an API that you could consume that could allow you access to that data. Also, if you want to include some sort of mapping technology on your app so that your customers could get a picture of where exactly a property is located, you may not have to build that mapping technology from scratch as well. There are many existing map APIs out there that you can consume for that purpose. But if you really have to build an API from scratch, specifically a RESTful API or maybe a WebSocket API, you should look into Amazon API Gateway, which is a fully managed service that lets you develop, publish, maintain, and secure APIs at any scale. And I'm going to talk about API Gateway here in just a few seconds. But, we talk about every time, this topic of APIs comes up, we hear certain terms like, and I'm going to share my screen here, Braden. Let me just get set up here. I should have done this earlier, but I didn't. So
It's okay. We all like a little bit of impromptu authenticity.
I know, right? But that's the beauty of the show. Oops, I just attempt. Okay, sorry. yeah, so we hear about these terms when we talk about APIs. We hear about things called SOAP and REST and WebSockets and GraphQL. So I kind of want to touch on these items like really, really quickly. SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol. This was a type of API that was created by Microsoft in '98. It supports various types of protocol, but it was essentially created to expose web services over HTTP. It has a really rigid messaging structure, and it requires data to be in XML. And then there's REST, which has grown in popularity over the years, representational state transfer. It's gotten a lot more popular than SOAP because of its flexibility and ease of use. Like, you're not restricted to XML format for messaging. You can use other formats, like JSON being one of the most widely used, because it's a lot more lightweight. With REST, you manage resources using HTTP methods: get, post, put, delete, which I'll be able to show you around a bit with my demo in a few minutes. And there's also WebSockets. It's a protocol that provides bidirectional communication between client and server, and the connection is persisted until someone explicitly terminates the connection. So this is in contrast with what happens with REST APIs, for example. So with REST, the client establishes a connection with a server, which is, of course, a completely separate entity. The client makes a request, and then the server responds. And when the response is acknowledged by the client, the connection is then terminated. That's done. With WebSockets, for example, if you have a chat application, both ends can send requests and responses. The request initiation is not limited to one end, and the connection is persisted until, someone explicitly terminates it on one side. So there's that. And then there's also GraphQL. It's a query language for your API. So with REST, if you want to fetch data, depending on what you requested, the response may contain so much data, including data that you don't really need. So GraphQL allows you to filter out noise in your query. You can ask for specific fields only. Feel free to read up on all of these concepts, but I have to move on to my demo now so that I can hand it off to Postman, because this is really their show and I'm just, going along for the ride. So I created a small serverless app here. This app allows me to schedule Howdy partner episodes. Very simple. I have created an API using API Gateway. I have an API endpoint. Every time a request is sent to that endpoint, it triggers a Lambda function. I created a couple of Lambda functions, one for each action that I want to occur. If I make a GET request to my API endpoint, the Lambda function that gets triggered is one that scans my DynamoDB table that I created, which contains a list of Howdy partner episodes when they are scheduled. And if I make a put request, a different Lambda function gets triggered. The function writes data to DynamoDB. And of course, I didn't create a UI, so I'm going to have to test my API using Postman. So let's... Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm going to go to the API that I created here, and it's going to give me, or it already gave me this URL. So I am going to make a GET request so that I can get all the items that I have stored in my Lambda, or in my DynamoDB table. Okay, so I actually put some data in there, and I have a list of, let me see, is this 4 Howdy partner episodes, including the one that we're having today, which I just called it episode 2, but really this is the Postman Howdy partner episode. So if I want to put data there just to show you guys how that looks like. For instance, I want to put a certain episode 5. It's for April 21st without systems. I can make that request. It gave me a response called put item 5. And then if I try to get all of those items again, you'll see that it now contains a list of 5 episodes, including the one that I just put. Oh, sorry. The one that I just put is OutSystems, yes. I don't think I have a route to delete, but let's say I want to delete this episode 3 because, I didn't want it in that table. I'm going to go back to API Gateway just to show you guys the routes that I have created for this. So, there's that put route that's integrated to a Lambda function in the backend that allows me to write to that DynamoDB table. There's also that get route that's integrated to a different Lambda function that allows me to scan the DynamoDB table so I can get all of the items in that table. And then there's also another get route that allows me to just get a specific episode. But I'm going to actually create a delete route so that I can delete something from my table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to create another Lambda function for that because currently it doesn't exist. So I'm going to create this from scratch, and I'm just going to call it delete item from sample table is what I'm going to call it. I'm going to keep the runtime as Node.js, and then I'm going to change the default execution role to the microservice role because that has it gives me all the access that I need to that DynamoDB table.
Oh, nice. Node.js. I feel like a lot of people use Python. I am terrible at Node.js. I have not put in time to learn it.
Me as well, but I cheated and I copied somebody else's code, so that's why I have it.
The one thing that we were told not to do in school.
So yeah, like I said, I cheated and I've tested this, so I'm sure it's gonna work. Hopefully it works. I mean, I've made many mistakes in the past, but this one should work. Yeah, so this is just a Lambda function that essentially, if I actually requested a delete on a specific item ID on the DynamoDB table, that's exactly what it does. Otherwise, throw me an error that tells me what the hell happened and why it didn't happen. Okay, great. So that's that. And then I'm going to create another route on API Gateway for a delete. Going to go into that API that I created, and I'm going to do a delete route. And I'm just going to say, this is the endpoint. It's going to ask you for a specific ID. And I'm going to create it. And I'm going to attach an integration. And I want that to be the Lambda function that I just created. It's the delete item from sample table 1. And I believe that should work. So
Let's try it
now,
out.
yeah. Okay, so I, for example, want to delete item 3. Looks like it works just fine. So if I do a get again on all the items in that table, oops, there's this trailing thing that I don't want in there. Let's see, is item 3 still there? And no, it doesn't. So it absolutely worked. And of course, this is Postman that I'm using to test my API.
Awesome. Yeah. You didn't have to have like a full-on UI to make sure your backend work. It's just always really nice. It's pretty hefty too. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you ask me to design a UI, I mean that, I would highly suggest that you don't do that first of all. But yeah, super useful tool.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Claudine. Let's hand it off to Postman. And before we jump into Ken's main portion on API first, which I'm really excited to get into, if the audience is not familiar with Postman, can either Mark or Ken give us a quick intro on Postman for our audience today?
Sure, sure. I mean, I think Claudine showed what, 90% of our 13 million developers do with Postman. They're just kicking the tires, trying to figure out how it works, try to quickly put an existing API to work, quickly iterate on a new one like she just did. So really, that's what Postman is that the technical phrase would be an API client. So it acts as that user interface. So you don't have to build out the user interface. But over the years, Postman started, 2013, and so over the years, it's become much more, which I'll give you a little bit of a look into. But first of all, I wanted to say, I mean, one, I love your restaurant analogy, Claudine. That was like, as far as like relaying it, what an API is to folks, I think that's probably the most relatable uh, explanation I've ever come across, because it's just like everyone knows a restaurant, everyone gets it. So,
You mean you
and then
don't go to the kitchen directly to order your food either?
yeah, yeah, it's like you said with Zillow, you don't, I mean, not every company can entertain every request for to do business from every application out there. And I think Flickr kind of, Katerina Fake, who was one of the co-founders of Flickr, seeded the notion that it's business development 2.0. That she was like, "Look, I don't have time to talk to y'all, but here's an API. Knock yourself out building something, and if it's cool and if it's needed by our community, we'll notice and we'll call you." So it's like, I love that. I think the restaurant analogy works well because you can't just go in and order anything. It's not your mom's kitchen either. I mean, I wish it was but so I really like that. I think that does a good job. And then two, your breakdown of SOAP, REST, WebSockets, GraphQL, that was really good too. I really like that. I think that was a nice breakdown for folks to try, because it's confusing, I think, to people who don't live in it like we do. So well, with that, let me dive in, I guess. Let me share my screen, Braden. Um, get to the right one here. And can you guys see my slide deck here? All right, cool. I'm gonna go into present mode, but I'm gonna preface it with don't be scared. I'm not gonna go into demo mode here. I'm a developer, but I kind of use my slide deck to kind of anchor how I'm gonna talk about things, and it grounds me. Otherwise, I'll just blab on and it won't make any sense. So let me just dive into presentation mode, and I'll kind of set the table, and then we'll dive back into Postman like Claudine was, and show you how to actually do this. So first of all, my name's Ken Lane. I'm chief evangelist for Postman. I have been studying APIs for the last decade. I started in 2010. Really, Amazon was the catalyst, literally, for my career. Like Jeff Barr was the model for how I do what I do, and Amazon APIs are definitely the kind of bedrock of how I work and how I see APIs. So this is something that I'm very passionate about. And about a year and a half ago, I joined Postman as their chief evangelist because I spent the last decade kind of talking about APIs, and I didn't do a whole lot. Just admittedly, like own anything production wise or build anything. So I really wanted to get my hands dirty more. And so here I am at Postman. Um, to set this table, this is kind of, this is what I've seen for the last 20, 25 years. And this is what got me onto the game is APIs are everywhere. And I know I'm biased, but APIs are literally behind everything that we do today. As Claudine said, like Zillow, real estate, mapping, Google Maps, OpenStreetMaps. But all of this was really kicked off by eBay, Amazon, and Salesforce, kind of setting the table for what web APIs can do. And then now, I mean, APIs are how you do business. I mean, APIs are everywhere. But if you've been in the game for very long, you know that APIs aren't always the easiest to use. They're not always documented well, and the communication around them between teams isn't always what it should be. And so, when people are producing APIs for others to consume, if they're not communicating and working together and kind of working from the same page, you can really come up with a disconnect of what's going on, and your API tends to be buggy. It changes depending on who developed it within your team. And when you're a consumer, that really means that things are difficult to actually put to work and put to use, and documentation is not up to date, and there's just a lot of friction. And so over time, the companies who are kind of led the conversation have kind of developed new ways of looking at this. And one, I mean, there's many kind of religions to doing APIs, but one approach is called API first, and it's a way that you can design, document, mock, and kind of iterate on your API without actually deploying it yet. And then once you get it to a point where everyone's in agreement, producers and consumers, then you can deploy it. So this is where the PowerPoint presentation fails me, and I've got to exit and go into the product here. So how about you guys, Claudine? Do you guys hear much talk about API first, or is it still? I mean, I still feel like sometimes it's academic and it's a lot of talk, and it's really nice. But do you guys see people talking about it in the AWS partner community?
Honestly, I looked it up when you first told me when we first got to talk. But I think the general concept of starting with API is a best practice. We just haven't had a formalized conversation about it, which I'm super
Yeah.
excited to get into today.
Well, I mean, and I think I love the honest approach. I mean, really, API first I was actually surprised. We did a developer survey. We have what's called the State of the API survey we do with our developers, and we asked 13,000 developers. And I think it was like upwards of 40% are either doing API first or thinking about it. And that was more than I thought, because I still feel like it's a lot of talk, and on the ground within organizations you don't always actually have the time to do API first, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So what I wanted to do is actually kind of show you how you can approach API first. And I'm going to dive into Postman. I'm using Postman on the web here. Instead, Claudine was using it for the desktop, but both same interface, same approach. Free tools, as well as you can pay to get more collaboration and usage. But all the features of Postman are free to all users. If you're paying for it, you're just paying for more users, more access to resources. So this is Postman. As Claudine showed you, it's a tool for kind of understanding how APIs work. Um, you can have different environments, which are kind of where you put your keys to different APIs and your tokens. And as she showed you with her API, you can make a call to the API and you get a response back, and it gives you full control over the ability to craft exactly the request you want, choose your authentication, adjust headers. These things are difficult to do in a browser. And then once you make your request, you can do the same for your response. You can look at the headers, you can look at your cookies. If there are any, you can look at the detailed response. And so this is really what most users use Postman for, is just understand what's going on with an API and how to use it. And as Claudine showed you, you've got full access to your verbs, or your HTTP methods.
So,
And
I'm going
yeah,
to pause just for a second. We had a question in the chat, and I think you kind of went over this a little bit, but someone asked if Postman was an AWS service. So it isn't, but can you tell them a little bit about how they can get Postman onto their desktop to be able to use it, either as a free tier application.
Sure. So we are working on getting into the AWS marketplace. So you will be able to provision sometime this year, provision Postman using the AWS marketplace, which means you'll be able to pay your bill using your Amazon bill, the billing system, which helps in a lot of organizations. But for right now, Postman is a SaaS. It's a software as a service. So you can go to postman.com to be able to get access, and you can just choose to launch it here, or you can download the desktop application if you want. So click on Learn More, and you can get at the downloadable version. But launching it on the web and then using it as a web application is the quickest way to get up and running. And you can do it. You will need to sign up to launch the web version, but it's totally free. All, as I said, all the features are available across the board here. What you get when you start paying is you end up with more kind of usage. You can have more users. You can have more monitors, more usage of the features. Some of the features will limit you in what you can do, and then you can find the appropriate plan to pay for it. So. Hopefully that
Awesome.
helps you get on board. Feel free to ping me at Kin Lane on Twitter. I'm pretty easy to find and happy to guide you in. But as you can see, I got a little chat there. There's a whole apparatus here to help you onboard if you have any questions.
Awesome. And before we move on, we have a couple other folks who have joined us, so I just want to sync back in with our audience. If you're just joining us, we are doing another Howdy Partner episode, and today we have Postman with us, and Kin will be talking about API first. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat, and feel free to interact with us as we go through Kin's demos.
Awesome.
Off you
Welcome,
go.
everybody. Welcome. So as I was saying, I'm in Postman. I'm just playing with an API here. Just for context, this is a products API. It's a sample one that I build a lot. But I wanted to point out I'm not actually using a real API yet. We're going to deploy an API kind of as part of this process, but all I've got it is mocked, and I'm going to kind of back up and walk you through how I did that. So I'm in a workspace here in Postman, and Postman's all centered around workspaces. When you sign up, you get your own personal workspace, which is just under my workspace. So what you put in here, nobody else sees, but you can create as many different workspaces as you want. Excuse me. And you can share those with teams across team members, so you can collaborate and work in a workspace together. And you can share collections. Collections are just basically a folder full of API requests that you made. So this one is a get products request where I'm able to get all products. And Claudine's example kind of showed this, because then I can also get a single product if I want to pass in an ID, and then I can add, update, and delete products as well. And so this is a sample API I use a lot in demos because it's fairly easy for people to relate with. But after watching Claudine, I think I'm going to replace it with a restaurant one because I really like that. I think that works well. So I have a collection of that I can make calls to my API, but how did I get here? Why? How can I do? Excuse me. Say this API doesn't exist, and I want to design it and build it as a team. And so this is what we call API first, or more specifically, API design first. And before I dive into that, let's kind of break down what is API first, because there's a lot of interpretations about what it means. First and foremost, API first means you're not building an application right now. I'm not building a website or a mobile app or some sort of device application. I'm going to build the API first. Now, even once you're on that team API first. There's several kind of schisms in that community. The first one is code first. So I'm going to actually write the code and build this API. And the other camp is design first. So I'm actually, before I code it, I'm going to actually design it. I'm going to document and mock it. And then I'm going to share that with consumers and other stakeholders to make sure it's doing what it should be doing before we invest any time in coding it. And not I would say about, less than 20% of our users are hardcore API design first. But as I said, about 40% of the ones we surveyed are doing this to try to be more efficient. And as I was showing in the deck, is try to um, introduce more communication, more collaboration, and talking to your consumers before you actually release or develop an API to kind of limit how much things can break, things are missing, it's not doing what it should do. So when you're doing API design first, most things start with what's called an open API specification, which is also known as Swagger in the space. And I have one here in Postman that's simply called products. And I'm giving this is kind of my overview for my API. Let me zoom in just one more click. Always, oops, there we go. And then I have what's called the Open API definition right here. And what Open API is a description of the API that I'm going to deploy to Amazon. And I'll quickly load up. If you go to openapis.org, this is the specification, and you can get at the latest version of it here. And it details everything that I'm going to show you. But we're not going to dive too deep into Open API. We're just going to kind of assume that that this is what you're using to design your API. So how are we doing, Hahnara? We got any more questions? Anybody chiming in?
No, everyone seems super excited from your demo so far. So a lot of
Okay.
good responses.
Okay.
And truck
Well,
on ahead.
I don't want to plow too far too fast, so I'll make sure and pause.
For sure.
Look what I did probably in some other demo. I put a Z after products. Anyways, so this is what an open API does is, at the very least, it gives our product an API a name, and we've got a description, and then what version. So we're starting at version 1. And then it allows you to start describing the different paths that we're going to be, or routes that we're going to be using to allow people to make calls. And then we can describe those different methods that we use, post, put, delete, all of those, get, all the ones we're going to use, and then the technical details of each one of those requests. And this looks like a lot, but once you start kind of studying the Open API specification, and then if you've developed any APIs, you start seeing the common patterns here. So I have a path called product that I can post to. If I scroll down, I can also get products. I can, and then similar, you have a products with a product ID. I can get, put, and delete on that as well. And then it describes the schema that can be passed back and forth when you make those requests, how you post your information, how you put it, and then what you can expect back when you make a request. And so this is, some people like to handcraft these. I'm kind of a nerd that way. I like to handcraft my open APIs, but a lot of times this gets generated from your Spring Boot. It can be generated from a gateway, AWS API gateway. You can import and export your open API definitions into it. So it's kind of the common vocabulary. So say we're back to Claudine's. This is another reason I love your analogy. Is the restaurant, and I got to make this a restaurant API next time. So this is your menu. Think of this as your menu that you look at, so you're going to know what you can order. And so this has all the, it's got the burgers, it's got the fries, it's got the shanks. shakes. It's the rules of what I can order. You know, I can't go walk into Burger King and I can't order an enchilada. Or maybe you can. I haven't been in Burger King in a while, but and so there. Think of the open API as a set of rules. And before we actually code this, we plan out the menu. So it's kind of like in a restaurant. You know, you can't just open up a restaurant and not know what you're going to serve and what you're going to do. This is the planning process. This is how we're going to prepare our menu, and this is how we're going to kind of codify it in a way that now we can have a conversation with other folks about this. And so when in Postman, you can bring your other team members in here um, and start having a conversation around this. There's two modes for the Open API editor. There's work kind of building mode, and then there's comment mode. And if I go into comment mode, I can have conversations with folks about what we're building here, why this works, and I can mention them. So if I want to bring in other team members, I can mention them and I can start a conversation. But more specifically, you can dive in on specific parts of the API. So say I want to get products and the parameter is query. I can say, well, you know, do we want to call this, uh, do we call this query or simply queue? And then I can leave that open for comment and other folks can come in here and answer those questions and chime in on what gets built, making this an iterative process and having a
Can
conversation about each part of it.
Is there any documentation where folks can find best practices? So, as you're collaborating and working together with your team, are there best practices we can look at and provide feedback to each other on based off of that?
Yeah, the Postman is going to have everything that you're going to need to dive into different areas. There is some Open API stuff here, but we're working with the Open API initiative to get cross pollinate because you got to realize where Postman's a Swiss Army knife. So whoops, wrong workspace. So this is Open API, which is an open specification that we use inside Postman. So we can help you with the best practices of using Postman in combined with this, but then there's more that you can learn from Open API as well. So I recommend learning.postman.com and then openapi.org will get you to the Open API part of this.
Awesome.
So back to our Open API here, we can everyone can kind of nerd out on this if they really want to, and we can handcraft our Open API. But really, most people aren't going to be able to do that. Most people are not Open API literate, so it really takes a lot of practice to get there. So I'm going to go back into build mode. And then what you can do from this is once you get it to a certain spot, and even when you start a brand new one, it gives you enough to get going that you can generate a collection, a Postman collection from this. And you can give it a name, and then you can define what the purpose is. For an API first process, the thing that helps make it real very quickly is to mock your API. And it'll take that open API and it'll create a mock instance of it that acts like the API based upon your open API definition. And then the second way is you document that and provide actual documentation for users. So if you, in an API design first, we create the open API, we create a mock, and then we create a documentation and we share that with our team. And then we invite feedback about what is happening. And so I've already generated my collections because I've done quite a bit of work on them, and I didn't want to take up too much time showing what happens after we generate them. But the first two that I generated are here, documentation and mock, as I said. I could do this as the same collection, but for demo purposes, it's kind of nice to see them as separate ones. And there's some other benefits of having them separated by kind of purpose or stop along the API lifecycle. So I've generated a mock and I've generated a doc, And you can look at the mock servers here. So I have a products one that I generated with that collection. And this will give you a URL, much like Claudine grabbed the URL of AWS. This just gives you a mock one that's much quicker and dirtier. The AWS one is actually fully functional. This one is just a mocked static representation. And I've put this in my environment, which is here. So I've got a products mock. I've put this URL right here in my environment. And then when I'm loading any of these collections that I've created, the docs, the mocks, or others, I can load that environment right here. And when I'm going to make a call to get products, I have a variable called base URL. And this mouse over gives me that mock URL and just injects it right here. And I'll show you why in a little bit, why that matters. And then it just asks for products. And that's what I'm getting when I hit send on this. This is just the mocked response. And these responses are just an example right here that is generated from the Open API. So I didn't actually create this. It just creates examples for each one based upon what was in my Open API definition. And so now teams can get more hands-on with it. They can look at the documentation for this. Let me click open. So it'll actually show like documentation like folks are used to. It's got a name, description, it's got the endpoint, it's got your request parameters, it's got example requests. It kind of looks like documentation that folks are used to. So it makes your API as real as possible by giving you a mock server and a documentation. Then your team can come in here, and because I'm zoomed in, my screen's a little cluttered. They can actually be making calls to it, um, making changes on the fly, coming in here to the example, changing, saying, no, let's add this parameter, let's add this parameter, and make the changes they want to see. Or they can switch to comment mode and just comment on certain parameters, certain parts of the documentation, and start a thread just about specific aspects of the development. And so what we've done now is API first wise is we've taken Open API, started with this as the seed, kind of got the base structure of what we envision our API doing, based upon common kind of RESTful practices. And then you generated a mock server and a set of documentation. And then we can iterate upon this until we're satisfied with this set of results. And what this does is this really gets back to what I talked about here as being the common problems between producers and consumers is things once an API has been developed and deployed and your consumers have to use it, it's almost kind of too late at that point. Why not mock and document it and invite those users to your workspace so that they can comment and provide feedback before you actually write the code for it? So you're shortening that feedback loop for when developers that you because if you deployed that API, you know you're going to be revving it each time, and you got that longer feedback loop. But if we can shorten it, increase the feedback early on, and then once this contract or this Open API definition is suitable and meets everybody's needs, and they can actually test it and see it working and play with it, so it's not, you know, academic, it's real at this point. So that really is the core of API first, to be able to allow people to do that without incurring the costs of development and really inviting people to have a conversation. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I think you bring up some really good points. And I mean, I've seen this in development painful amount of times. Well, the experience is painful to go back through such a long loop from presenting to the end users and having to go all the way to the drawing board when you already have a working UI. So it's really awesome that there's such a formalized process that teams can work through together, as well as with the users. But we have a question in the chat, which is a really good question. I also don't know the answer. But what is the mock server in this blueprint?
So the mock server this is a Postman feature, but we're taking this open API right here, and we're generating a static representation of it. So it knows what the paths are, it knows what the HTTP methods are, it knows what's expected as part of a request and a response. It's got examples right here, and it just turns those examples into requests and response to mock what is happening. And so this is a Postman feature, just like documenting is a Postman feature, but mocking, you can search for anything open API mocking, and there are endless numbers of services out there that will help you mock your API. And this is really shows what a lousy Postman salesperson I am in showing that there's all these other tools you can do what I just showed you to do on our platform. But that's APIs for me, and Postman is very much a Swiss Army knife, meaning you can use us to test your APIs, but not document. You can use us to document and mock your APIs, but you don't have to use it for testing. And so you can pick and choose. The really critical piece of this is that you have your APIs defined as Open API or Swagger. And just real quick, you don't have to do Open API 3 or Swagger. You can do RAML or GraphQL in here as well. I'm just showing you with Open API 3. But the core part of this is that you're creating this definition or this contract for your API. There's plenty of other tools to take that open API and document and mock it. I'm just showing you how Postman does it. So so we've taken our open API contract, we've documented it and mocked it. We've collaborated with other team members. I can invite team members here. They can comment. They can respond to comments. We can have a conversation about what this should do and what it shouldn't do. We're doing it in an API design first way, so we're not talking about the web or the mobile app yet, but we've invited the mobile or web app developers to have a conversation about what should be in here. And so we're designing the API first, and we're going to build it before or deploy it before we actually build any applications. And so now that my contract or my open API is kind of stabilized, we're in agreement of what it should do, the documentation and the mock servers work well, then we can do what Postman excels at is we can write contract tests for this. And that what contract tests are, and again, you can do this as the same collection, but I'm doing it as a third one, and I'll show you why. Is I have each of those endpoints to get, add, update, and delete my APIs. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to actually write scripts that validate that the response is meets what we defined in our open API here. So I have
So
oh, go ahead.
before we jump into the contract testing portion, we do have another question in the chat. Um, Alex S. Masha asked if there's any ETA on getting visibility of sync status. I guess I'm not sure
Yeah,
if this resonates
I
with you.
understand. I
Okay.
understand so one of the things you can do is you can sync your open API to GitHub. And so you can okay, so maybe there may be a couple ways of syncing between what they're talking about. So one is you can sync your open API to GitHub, and it will, any changes made here, it'll sync to your GitHub, and then in your GitHub it'll sync it back here. That's one type of sync we have. The other type of sync, which I just clicked open to my Postman on the desktop, which looks slightly different, and I'm in a different workspace. Let me get in the right workspace. So I'm in the same workspace, but I'm in Postman on the desktop. And because this uh, is on your desktop, it's got a sync to between your desktop and the cloud. And this is one of the reasons why I work on the web, is because it's automatically synced. So they could also be talking about this sync status, and what you do have, you should be able to see whether it's syncing, whether it's not, if an error was encountered. But if you're talking about the sync status of your Open API definition, I know that that's being worked on right now. And because you can sync your Open API, but you can't sync your collections right now. And I know that we're working on kind of bringing harmony to that and providing more windows into that.
So following up, I'm going to ask Call Me Tofu's question,
Mhm.
but I will get to you, Irevnik. Um, so Call Me Tofu asked if there's any way they could enable auto sync save for every request, because sometimes they forget to hit save, and I've definitely been a victim of not pressing save.
Oh
um,
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, Command S or Control S will do it for you in the browser. So that's a quick way to do it. I constantly hit my Control and Command S to hit save because I'm OCD about that. I don't want to lose things. Um, but as far as like an auto save feature, I really recommend um, Postman Labs, which is on our GitHub repository. There is Postman app support, and I always recommend coming here and searching and seeing if someone, here we are. So if there's save responses when requests, so there's several, there looks like there's several of them. Chime in, vote them up, because this is what we're paying attention to for the roadmap. So if this is an important one, find the auto save. Here we are, auto save request and collection after edit. I would chime in. Looks like it's been fairly lively there. So it looks like there's two of them. So I would definitely go there and chime in on that. Whoops, wrong
awesome.
workspace again. We got another
Yeah,
before I dive back in?
I just wanted to mention that I dropped the link into the stream. So if anyone would like to have access and collaborate on that, it's there. And I want to pause again just to welcome any new folks who have joined in. Um, so uh, we are Howdy Partner, and today we have Postman joining us. Ken Lane, the Chief Evangelist of Postman, is going through a demo and talking about API first development today. And we do have a new person who joined the stream and asked a question. So Irevnik asked, I'm so sorry if I'm saying it wrong too, but they asked, can the mock APIs be invoked from outside Postman, from an external client?
Wow, you guys are asking all the great questions. Yes, you can. Um, because we're a API company, Postman has an API. And let me zoom in, and you have access to all of your collections, all of your environments, all of your mock servers. And here, I'm going to put this in the chat here, so because it's kind of a longer one. Um, and and so you have access to your workspaces. You can import and export. Import and export. You can there's an API. Just if you really want to get nerdy, you can play with the API that allows you to work with different versions of your open APIs. You can pull the open APIs, import the API. So yeah, you can automate. It's not complete feature parity, but by the end, it's one of my pet peeves is anything I do in the app, I want to be able to do by the API. That's as a developer. We're not there, but by the end of the year, we will be. everything in the app you'll be able to do here via the Postman API. And I'll show a little bit of this in the next demo, next part of this as well. So.
And
Awesome.
Kin, somebody mentioned earlier that they recognize you because they read a book that you wrote 10 years ago.
Yeah, either I wrote a book or I do a lot of, I don't write as much as I used to. So I do a lot of forwards in API books. So a lot of people see my name that way too. But pleasure. Thank you for reading the books. I appreciate it. I've been doing it a while. I've been doing this for a number of years. So back to our Open API contract that we've mocked and documented and iterated upon. I want to, before I allow this to be put into production, because it's not that I don't trust my developers. I just want to make sure that when they develop the API, that it adheres to everything we just agreed upon with all the stakeholders. I don't want it to do other things or unexpected things. So, and that's why I keep calling this a contract. This is my API contract that I just hammered out with all of our stakeholders, all the people who matter early on, so that when we develop and deploy it, it does what is expected. And this is where Postman really excels. So I have this other collection, which looks just like my documentation one. It's got the same endpoints. But for these, I'm writing tests. So in Postman, this is one of the really nice features of Postman is you have pre-request and then test scripts, which I don't like the name of. I think it should be post-request script, but I don't get to make all the rules. That these run right before, right when you hit send, it runs first, then it makes the API call, and then the test one runs after the response comes back, and you can then manipulate and work with the response using a script. And when it uses chai, which is an assertions library, to then test your response to make sure it's doing what it should do. We'll go through all the code here, but I'll go ahead and hit send. I see the response as I would any normally, but if you look up here, body, you'll see test results. It it shows me all of the tests that I run on my API now. It checks, is it a valid status code 200? Is it have a body? Is the body valid JSON? And then this is the most important one here. This is a step, which I'll go quickly to my script. It uses a library called AJV, which is another JSON schema validator. And it takes my open API here and actually make sure that the response for get matches what I've specified here in my response body. And this is a product I'm expecting back, which if I scroll down, here's products, which is an array of product. And here are all the properties of a product. And this is called JSON schema, this part of the Open API specification. And it describes what is a valid product. And when I run my tests, this is what I'm checking for, is I'm pulling that product schema, and then I'm running a test to tell me if it met. And this was valid JSON schema. Now, this is where Postman really shines, and most of our developers using it, is this collection right here now. I can run this, each of the steps. I can run it all as a series of steps. I can hit run, which loads up. I can choose, well, I don't want to delete it. If I don't want, I can unselect that. I can choose which environment, which I have products mock open, and I can run that contract test. And it's going to tell me anyone that fails. And so the add and delete, it looks like all of them are failing because this is a static API. It's not a real API. But I know that the base of mine works. But before I send this open API out the door to be developed, I have my documentation. I've mocked it. We've agreed upon this contract, and I have contract tests in for that Now I've got some other tests which we'll talk about in a little bit, but really these three are part of my API first process along with this open API. I have a contract for my API. I've mocked it, I've documented, and I've got tests that can be exported and run elsewhere by any developer to verify that my API is working. So that's the API first process. Now I can show you how we can actually deploy this with AWS um, using Postman, and then we can use some of the other testing stuff. But let me pause there, see if we got any other questions.
This demo, I did not even realize. I think I have already gone through trying out contract testing. I actually had to use it for one of my classes when I was back in school, and it was the dreaded testing portion of my APIs that would return what failed and would determine my grade. So I'm having like traumatic flashbacks right now,
No,
but definitely
PTSD.
super awesome to have in the development process. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, hopefully you got an appointment with your therapist scheduled at some point here after this, and you can work through that with them. We're happy to help you out, but hopefully if you're doing the testing, it's alleviating anxiety and you don't have to worry about things breaking. So, and hopefully Postman can make it easier so you don't have as much anxiety. But I agree, it's the whole life cycle stresses me out sometimes. All right, so let's just go real quick back to our deck because it kind of grounds me. Um, so we're here. We just did the API first demo, and so now we're kind of rocking. We're a little smoother in our process. We've designed, we've mocked, we've documented it. We've brought in our stakeholders, but we've got to deploy this, and we've got to that's the one thing Postman does not do for you is Postman cannot deploy your API. We're not an API gateway provider. We don't have a database solution. And so to kind of get to the rest of this where you can monitor, you can secure and run those tests and actually consume and make requests to an API, we've got to deploy it. And but what Postman really excels at is helping make the deployment process more observable and something you can see. I mean, that's really what like when Claudine showed how she makes the gets and the posts and the requests, that's making an API kind of visible and tangible. The same thing that documentation does, because they're invisible abstract things that you're like, what does it do? And so when you deploy an API, it's really hard to see that unless you're the developer in the console doing it. So Postman really kind of helps you automate this, and we're not going to develop our own API gateway solution because we have amazing partners with amazing API gateway solutions, and we don't have to do that. So back to my open API here in my workspace. I've also got a tab open with another workspace, which is called API deployment or just deployment. I actually should rename that to API deployment. But I've got a handful of collections in here. And because all of AWS's services use, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit because that's not working very well. There we go. Because all AWS services have APIs, we can make collections that call those APIs to deploy our APIs. And so I have a collection here that has a 10-step process, which I'll zoom back in for, and it's documented. But the steps are, it will actually deploy our API, and it'll deploy any API. This is a pretty basic, simple API that only uses AWS API gateway with DynamoDB. I do have another one down here that uses AWS API gateway Lambda and RDS, but we'll save that for a future demo. What I'm going to do is show you how you can deploy using a collection here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this collection. to my products workspace, because this is what I would consider an operational level blueprint. It can be used by many different APIs. So I'm going to share this to my workspace so I can just use it temporarily there. And you can define roles, who has access to it and whatnot. Now I have a cleanup because I'm anticipating having to deploy this and then clean it up. So I have a remove one I'm going to share here as well. So let me share that as well. Right. Now we should be able to go back to our products workspace, and we should have two new collections in here that are just going to be here temporarily. And the one of them is going to deploy our API, and the other will clean it up so I can show you different ways of doing it. So let me quickly go over to my API gateway here. I've got it filtered by product. As you can see, I'm not hiding anything behind my hands here. No APIs found. Let's click to DynamoDB. I've got no tables in DynamoDB.
What if you switch your region on us? And all your work was there.
Okay, I'm in Virginia. I'm in Northeast Virginia. I'm in North Virginia. Okay, so no
Okay.
no tricks up my sleeve here. This is a real live demo. But there are other ways I've done smoke and mirrors that I know even beyond switching regions. But I'm doing this for real. Let's go back to our workspace. And I'm going to do this manually step by step, and then we're going to clean it up, and then I'm going to show you another way that you can automate it. So the first one is I'm going to pull my open API. So this is actually using the Postman API. So that was great that we had that question about, automating using the Postman API. So I'm going to pull my open API, this products one right here, using the Postman API. And I have to pass in my workspace name. So I'm in products API blueprint. Have to pass in the name of the API and then the version, because I can manage multiple versions with this. So what this is going to do is this is going to pull it, and it's going to put it into my environment. And so I don't want to use my mock environment for this. I have this other one, and I'm not going to show you the details of this environment because it's got my keys, my AWS tokens and keys in it. But this is where I put my tokens and keys. But what I'm about to show you is another secret is you can store anything in an environment. You can store results from your API calls. You can, it's basically a key value store. Now, there are limitations, and I've blown it up a couple times. So be careful how much you put into it. I did pull like all of my tweets since 2007, and I blew it up. So be careful. But what I'm going to do is then hit send, and you're going to get back a response, a listing of APIs. But it found the API it needed, and it put it in here. It found the one with the right name, and it's here. Now my next step is I'm going to create a DynamoDB table. And so this is calling the DynamoDB API, action create table. And it's going to take the table name and the structure from my open API, and then it's going to create the DynamoDB table. And so if we go now over to the AWS console, we hit refresh, we should have a table there called products. Now, if I go back to my workspace, the next step 3, is let's prepare that API for publishing. So I can import my open API to AWS API Gateway, but you have to bind it to my DynamoDB table. You have to add some extensions to it. AWS has defined some really great gateway extensions to the spec. And so I need to add those before I send it. So this step is just a preparation step. No real magic going on yet.
We have a question? I think people are having trouble seeing, so they want to have a little zoom up if that's possible.
Yeah.
Or our Wizard of Oz in the back can help us with that as well.
So I zoomed in one more bit. I agree. It can be hard to see sometimes, but this is about as big as I can get without it getting too cluttered. Hopefully
Yeah.
that helps. So
Okay, we're good.
there's a lot going on in here. But you, the other thing is, and we did share the links with this, is this URL right here that for the products API blueprint. This is a public workspace. If you go to that URL, you can look through this yourself. Now it'll take a little bit to get it set up and configured, and you're welcome to comment. But if you want to look at it and play with it, you can go there. Um, but so step three, I prepared it for publishing. The next is I'm actually going to post it to the AWS API gateway. And so I've got the base URL here for the AWS API gateway, and it's going to post uh, my open API with my extensions. And when it comes back, I'm actually given my AWS information. The AWS API Gateway is an amazing hypermedia API. So you get all of your URLs of all the actions you can take. It's super robust, more information than we need. All I really needed was one property, which I grabbed here in the post request script. I needed the gateway API, the ID for the gateway, and I stored that in my environment. So I didn't really need the rest of this. But I did grab the ID and put it in my environment because the next step, I need to deploy that to an actual stage. I'm just doing that to, I believe, development. My stage name is development, and it's going to deploy that. And I've gotten back the ID for that deployment. And next, I don't want this public to be publicly available because this is, I want to be able to have this in a usage plan and require keys. So I have to create a usage plan. And then I'm going to create an API key to secure it. And then I'm going to add that key to the usage plan. And so there's not much to see. I just kind of talk through what all just happened, and then we'll do it again here in a bit, and it'll be a little bit more tangible. But the last two steps are actually make a call and add an entry. And so let's try making a call to our API. So this is actually going to call the API that I added, and there it is, but it's empty. There's nothing in it. So let's go ahead and add an entry to it. This is a basic product, minimum viable product name, identifier, and description. I'm going to hit send. It says 201 created. And then I go back to my Git, and there's my product one. And I've added it. So I've got a basic 10-step hello world deploy to AWS and DynamoDB for my products API from my API first products API that I developed. Now, let's do that again because that's why you could just do that through the console. It doesn't really make sense of why you would want to do all of that. But before we do, let's go to the API gateway here. Let's hit refresh. You'll see I've got my products DynamoDB API, and similar to Claudine, I can click in and I can see all my routes and all my HTTP methods. Let's go back. I'm going to filter again by products. I'm going to, there's my API, there's my table. I've got this cleanup script here that I'm going to run, and it just basically reverses everything we just did. So I can do this again. So it is not working. Why are you not working? Hate it when it does that. It's like the demo gods, right? Cursing me. So run.
It's proof that you didn't switch regions or have any kind of smoke and mirrors in the background.
Yeah, but it should just work. Why don't you work? Okay, so rather than I can figure out, I've seen a couple things that make it stop working, but let's go here and this will show you I get further, not smoke and mirrors. Let's delete my API. Let's hit delete.
It's all
So
part of
table.
it.
Yeah, but this is the sleight of hand where you think it's real. No, it's real. Let's delete the table, and I gotta say delete. Like the ones that say delete me rather than delete. There's some AWS services where you gotta say delete me instead of just delete. I always love that reminder. So now we don't have an API and we don't have a table. So let's go back here. Whoops, that's my deployment. I'm going to get rid of this remove because you failed me. Now I can remove from this workspace. I don't want you here anymore. Go away. So now I've just got my 10-step ops deployment. Now let's see if the demo gods are in my favor here. So the power of a collection is I can export this. I can share it with anybody to another workspace, as I just showed you how I moved from workspace to workspace. I can embed it in documentation so others can run it, or I can just share it via a link and someone else can download it. So anyone on my team can run this against their own open API. And you can run this on a schedule. Say it's an API you need to deploy, leave up for an hour, and then clean up. You could, where's my monitor? So there it is. So you can run it on a schedule and choose when it runs. Hello. There it is. So I can choose when it runs on a schedule. I can even run it in different Amazon regions. So if I want to run it on a schedule from different regions, I can do that using Amazon because we're built on Amazon. And so I can do that. Or we have what's called Newman, which is um, named after the Seinfeld character. But
Oh, no
Newman
way.
Newman is a open source runner that you can run collections at the command line level. So using any CI/CD system, you can run this collection that will pull and deploy an API if you need to run it as part of another pipeline process. Say you're setting up a logging API, anything like that. So what I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going
I'm
to just
so
click on.
curious. I'm so sorry. I'm so curious. I need to know why it's Newman.
Yeah, I actually should do. I'm gonna do a backstory on that because um, you just search for Newman, it actually comes up first. Um, and so, I mean, I don't know if this is just personalized algorithm for me, but it's Newman's huge. Newman's pretty popular and it's used. I mean, both Newmans are huge. So it's a popular way to run collections as part of a CI/CD. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this just as a runner here, run all 10 steps using the environment that I have loaded, and I'm going to just hit run, fingers crossed. Don't make me look bad. All right, we got green on a table. We got green. Yes. All right. So it's going through each
Oh,
step.
this is very therapeutic for me.
So
This is an
now,
A.
so AWS API Gateway takes a few seconds to deploy it. So it won't actually run the last two successfully. But if I talk long enough and slow enough here, I should be able to just go back over here, hit send. Oh, I get a forbidden. But wait, give it a second. There it is. It just always takes a second sometimes. And then now I can add, and I should be able to go back and I should be able to get that product that I added. And to show you it's not smoke and mirrors, let's let's make this custom name. Yeah, let's hit save and let's hit send and let's go back and look, and we should have two products here. So I got product one and then I got my custom product here. And then if I go back to my gateway here, hit refresh, I've got a products API. And if I go back to my table, I've got a DynamoDB table. And so this API is pretty basic. Most APIs I deploy are going to use a Lambda in between, regardless of whether I use DynamoDB as the NoSQL store or I use RDS. I have Lambda in between because you're going to want that business logic layer. But I really like this as a basic demo because it's really like 10 steps hello world from an API first API. And I just think the relationship between AWS API Gateway and DynamoDB is just like dead simple key value CRUD database or API deployment. And I just think it makes for a great demo. So I'm happy to kind of talk through. I got some other things I could show, but let's pause there, see if we got any questions. If you guys have any thoughts, what do you think?
We have a comment actually in the stream chat from Kami Tofu, and he said, "Oh, we actually have a question from him." Um, he says that was a good instance of where it would be nice to be able to add a delay to individual queries in the Postman collection runner rather than on the whole collection. Why is that not a feature?
Yeah, again, I'm guessing it's been asked, and it's being worked on from what I remember. Delay requests, guessing, because I've had this conversation several times now. So yeah, the ability to basically, let me just kind of recap. So if you run this as a runner, you can say here, you can set a delay and say, uh, I want 10 seconds to delay between each of these runs. What he's asking for is he wants us on a per request basis to be able to say do this and then do this. Now, there are other ways that you can hack this within a flow. So say I want to run a step, X amount of times. You can do iterations. You can put, dummy steps in here and then have it repeat, put logic in it so it doesn't move on to the next step until it runs this one 5 times. So you can make steps become counters and run, you can build in that logic so it'll take as much time as it needs before it continues down the request. So there are creative ways you can do that, but I agree it's not in the interface. It's not overtly pulled out so that you can make it work, but it's doable. And I know it's being worked on, so it's definitely been heard. We just got to weigh all of the requests we get and figure out what should get into each release. Any other questions? Oh, did you go mute? Or am
Hahnara,
I?
you're on mute.
I wish I just had like an automatic um like sensor that I'm talking and it's relevant to the meeting and it's not something I need to be muted for. Some like AI and vocal sensors.
Then you'd burp or you would chew on something and you're on mute and it would turn on and everyone would hear you.
I know that's why there needs to be an AI element so it'd be able to capture that it's a burp and it's like, okay, it's not relevant. It's not going to add to the conversation. Although maybe it would.
But then you got AI going. Hahnara burped 5 times per meeting. She's like, you got all this data being tracked. Just kidding.
I know I'd probably have to talk to my doctor. Like, why am I? Do I have indigestion? Here are my data points. But anyways, fantastic little segue into my health. But yeah, we don't have any questions yet. But if anyone
Okay.
has any questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat. And while we have our experts with us, and yeah, is there anything else that you were curious about, Claudine?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Ken. So,
Yeah.
Postman, I love it. Thank you so much for the demo. How are you going to approach this from a security perspective? If you could just walk us through some of the do's and don'ts, like just
Yeah.
so, yeah, I think security is job zero here at, I mean, I don't think it, I know it. Security is job zero here at AWS. So if you could just give us an overview of what not to do.
Well, the first layer of this is always abstract away your tokens and keys. Don't put your tokens and keys into your collections. Always use variables and abstract those away into your environments, because I want to be able to, especially on demos here, here's a variable. I abstract away URLs because it allows me to switch them out and use different services and do things. But authentication, you never want to uh, click on my AWS signature and see my AWS key in secret. And so by abstracting this away to the environment, it allows you to then switch out different environments. I can have one for different accounts, and then just switch it and use the same collection. So never put your tokens or keys in a collection, because you want to be able to share this with other people, and you want them to have to bring their own keys to it, to the game. And that's how you do it, is if you share this collection, and in this public workspace, the environments, I'm not going to click on one because you'll see, I'll create a new environment. I can put, I can create a new environment for whatever persona I want. I can create any variable that I want, and anything that goes in initial value will be shared amongst your friends and anybody who has access to this. This becomes a public uh, representation. I wish it was better named, but once you understand it, this is when you first download the collection. This is what everyone sees, but this is what only you see is the current value. This is me. So what I usually do is, this is your key, and then, or token, to use the right word, and then I will actually put my real key here, and then I hit save. And when I run this, this becomes the variable, and it will grab this value and then inject it in there. So this allows me to maintain my environments for my personas, but it also allows you to create shared ones that you can share with people. Say it's a key and you're only sharing this between internal team members, or you have other security mechanisms and you can share it publicly, but you really probably shouldn't ever do that. So that's the first, is never store your tokens and keys in here. Store them in environments and apply them when you run them manually or as a monitor. Now, the second
Related
is,
to that, sorry, there's
yeah,
a
go
question in
ahead.
the chat from Tesseract. Um, any suggested ways to pull the tokens from something like AWS Secrets Manager, so that you can inject keys at
Yeah,
execution?
excellent question. No, there's not right now, but we're working on a vault that, when we actually need to build that around AWS infrastructure, so that we Postman platform never actually see your keys. And so we're going to work on that and make sure that that works, so that you can just rely on AWS to do all of that. And then I would say that sets the stage for the next tier, where I was going to go, is when you this deployment collection, it is dependent, um, when it prepares your API for publishing, it is dependent on you passing in an AWS IAM role, the ARN for an AWS IAM role. And so, thoughtful, I have collections that, you know, have a one-to-one mapping to IAM roles, because you shouldn't be able to do anything with the set of keys I'm using, except for what is needed right here. So the identity and access management roles I'm creating are very much in alignment with the collections itself and creating that scope. So I would love for Postman to be more seamlessly woven with that, and then automate a little bit more of that. I will show you another workspace I have. This one is, so this is my ops deployment set of collections. But here's my favorite AWS one here, and I spend a lot of time. And this is a collection for every AWS service. And this is how I build my operational collections, is I come here and I grab the parts and pieces that I need. And so I would love to start building collections that are self-management to a certain degree. Um, I'm just not a security expert, and we have a security team here at Postman. So the relationship between Postman environments, and key management and Cognito, we have a team working on that right now to help kind of abstract. And we already have, when you're working on a collection and you do the auth, we have many different authentication mechanisms, AWS signature being one. We're going to further keep abstracting away the complexity and give you ways of working. Utilize AWS for all your secrets management and make it seamless in the background. So.
Fantastic, Ken. Thank you so much. What is the best way for all of us to get updates on the latest and greatest from Postman?
Well, when it comes to Postman, I recommend if you're a blog read if you're into blogs, and our subdomains are great for this. blog.postman.com will get you to our blog, and there's a lot of great stories here about how to stay in tune. If you have questions and you want to, talk to folks and ask questions, community.postman can get you a lot of your questions answered, and you can find existing questions. And then, as I showed you earlier, and I don't know why I didn't give you these links. I should have given you all these links along with it. I was so bad at that. So I apologize. So blog.postman.com, community.postman.com, and learning.postman.com. You should be able to find everything you need across those three resources. But you know, I'm easy. I'm chief evangelist. You can find me on Twitter. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm pretty easy to find online. Feel free to just ping me questions if you got them, or if you've got specific questions on any of the Amazon Web Services ones that I have, um, this products API blueprint, you can come here and just leave comments and ask me specifically here. I get notified and I get emails from all of you when you leave comments on these. And if you want to stay in tune with any of these, you can watch the collections, you can fork them, and this is all available in public workspaces if you need to have a conversation. So just dive in.
Awesome. Well, if we don't have any more questions, is there anything else that you wanted to demo or show?
I think that's the bulk of it. I think that's hits a sweet spot. I've always got more things to talk, but I think we've talked plenty. Gave you guys a nice sampling of API first, show you how you can actually deploy to AWS. So I think that's enough for today, and we can maybe we can do this again sometime.
Oh yeah, for sure. I definitely learned a lot during this time.
Me too.
And hopefully everyone in our stream has been having a good time. I think we got some really great engagement and really great questions too from our audience today. So Claudine, we have our tradition. I forgot the 3 phrases.
I'm not going to do that.
Come on, Claudine.
I always ask AM to do that because he's a Texan, but or maybe Braden can make himself heard during this, just for this one portion, so he can do it because he's Texan. Is he pretending to not hear me?
Yeah, he's
Maybe.
He said he's not mic'd up.
Oh, that's very convenient.
I know, right?
Okay, well, I totally forgot the 3. Oh, Happy Trails. Yeah, Happy Trails is one of them.
Y'all come back
Y'all come back now.
Y'all come back now.
Great. Well, I had such
giddy
a
up.
great time. And I really hope we can do this again sometime. I think, Ken, you did such a great job. Very easy to follow. And thank you for not being presumptive about what, the audience is may or may not know. I think that you're super thorough and super clear, like throughout the demo. So super appreciate that. Fantastic job.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I guess also before we close, Mark, could you also provide any insight in the business portion if anyone wants to get started with Postman, whether it's with their teams or bring it into their development in their company? Is there anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're always looking to build out the public network. We have a public network of all of the companies out there that have built collections of APIs and have public workspaces. It's at postman.com/explore, and you can see tons of examples of how people are using or building their APIs and promoting them and building out developer communities from them. So that's a great place to start to really see the breadth of what people have done with it. I mean, it's pretty cool to see. So I would definitely have everyone start there. And if there's something cool, reach out, and then maybe we can go and explore how we can go and show the rest of the world what you've done and do something so that they can go all do cool things with it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think that's a great place to close off. We have provided some not so pretty looking links and resources, but hopefully those are helpful to everyone listening if you want to get started. Yes, move on, -1 for sure. That can help you get started on everything that we've covered today. But yeah, I guess we won't do our last 3 phrases. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free. Ken has provided his Twitter, and I saw how many followers you have. You're like, I'm like, wow, I'm with a famous person. I'm gonna tell my mom. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Blue check too.
Oh yeah, the prize blue check in our society today. But thanks so much, Ken and Mark, for joining. This was really fun. And yeah, everyone's coming up in with just compliments right now. So I think everyone loved having you guys on. So yeah,
Thank you.
well,
Pleasure's ours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for
all
having
right.
us.
Thanks
Have
everyone
a good
for
day.
joining today. And please come back next week for another episode. I don't know who our partner is, but that should.
J-Frog. We're
J-Frog.
having J-Frog, and I'm going to be actually co-hosting that with AM. So see you guys next Wednesday.
Cool.
Thanks again, Postman,
Thanks.
for joining
Bye.
us. Super.